All right, class. So I wanted to make this video to explain to you how to use my granular synthesizer if you want to use it um, at home on your own computer, or if you just need this again as a tutorial about how to do specific things. Um, so I made this in Max 8, and a couple of important things to remember is that I wrote this software, so there's really no way to Google any questions you have about it. You would need to just ask me if you run into a problem. You need to ask me because I'm the one that made it. Um, so let's start off with though actually installing this thing. So if I go over to Google Drive, I will share this folder with you. There's a folder called mcGranulator, and as you can see inside there are two versions. There's the Granulator Mac and the Granulator PC version. So they're a little bit different. The biggest difference is that the PC version is in a folder. So when you double click it, it's going to open a folder and you'll find the .exe file inside there, and you can double click to open it and then it'll open on your PC. On the Mac version, you just double click the icon and it will open up. It should just be a single file once it's unzipped. Okay? So let me explain then how you would install it for those of you that haven't really installed software before. You are going to run into problems that we have to get around. So, first of all, if you open a Mac, and again, these slides are a little bit older, and I'm not sure if Ventura is doing this identically like this, but the principal problem is that my software is not recognized by Apple as official software in probably some massive database of identified developers. So when you try and open the program, you're going to get this message about an unidentified developer. And you have to get past this. So you can't do this in the MIDI lab. Just be aware that's why I shared a flash drive with you, because you have to, if you try and download this software, that's when the computer recognizes that you've downloaded software, and it puts up a firewall to protect the computer from any malware or something like that. So when this pops up, what you have to do is go in the security and privacy settings, which are in the Mac settings at the top. So the little tiny apple at the top. You go into security and privacy, and again, if you don't know how to do that, Google it. There will be lots of videos or lots of pictures about how to get to security and privacy on a Mac. So after you've tried to open the program, not before, because it won't recognize this, you will see this box appear down here. And it says basically allow downloaded app. It will pop up down here. It's going to say something about my software specifically. It'll probably say mcGranulator was blocked from opening because it's not from an identified developer. You just click the open anyways button, and that will allow the granulator to open. Now you only have to do this one time. Once you've done it on your computer once, it will work from then on. Okay, so on a PC it's a little different. As I mentioned, when you download the folder, and these are older slides so you can see the Granulator Duo. It's not called that anymore. It's called the mcGranulator. The folder will look like this. And so you want to hit the extract all button at the top right here. And it's going to extract all the files. You run it, say yes. And when you do this, you will get this message. Windows is trying to protect your PC. So essentially, it's the same thing. Like, it's trying to protect your PC from unidentified developers, which is who I am. So what you have to do is click this more info button. When you click the more info button, this will pop up, and you can click on the run anyway button at the bottom. So once you've run this the first time, again, just like on the Mac, it won't pop up again. But that's how you get past the Windows firewall on the computer. Okay? Great. So once you've run it, or once you've done this and you have it extracted and you can open it, let's talk about how you set it up. So the first thing is, let me get past these. Oh, actually, yeah. So the audio setup. So remember, just like any program, this program also has its own audio settings, right? So you have to identify what output you're using. Really is the only factor here. Where is the sound going out? And I can do that down here in this button that says Configure DSP. So when I click this button one time, it's going to open a window that looks like this. And I want to make sure that my inputs and outputs are set correctly. So mine says Mac Pro speakers, MacBook Pro speakers, MacBook Pro microphone. Yours might say, you know, if you have headphones that you want to use on your MacBook, you would have to choose the headphones output, right? So if you have an audio interface, you would choose the audio interface. These settings are fine too. You can leave whatever you want down here, and that's fine. So one thing to notice too, if I make a change to this, so watch what happens if I switch this to Zoom audio device. It's going to shut off the audio. So see how this was, I think, white, and now it turned orange, and that means the DSP or the audio driver is off. And so I need to turn it back on to make it blue again, and you can see the CPU again is running, so that tells me it's on, okay? So if I switch this to MacBook Pro speakers, it's going to shut off again, and then I have to turn it off and on again, okay? So now it should be working and running fine. A good button to push to is this scheduler in overdrive and audio interrupt buttons. These two buttons are really useful. They basically prioritize audio output so that things, or not output, audio processing, so that the rhythm runs flawlessly in Macs, okay, or in the granulator. Great. So that's how you would get your audio up and running in the program. This big button down here at the bottom is your audio driver. So if this is off like this, then it will make no sound because the audio driver is off. I need to click this if it's off to turn it on to a light blue. Now, by default, it comes on automatically when you turn on the granulator. Great. So obviously, the first thing we need to do is get audio into these windows, right? So the easiest way, as I've mentioned, is to drag and drop. So I can go over here and grab any audio and drop it in here, as long as it's not an MP3, right? We talked about this before. It has to be an AIF or a WAV file. Probably some other formats will work too. I think MP4s work as well, but just be aware of that. There's another way to add audio too, which can be really useful if you want to load a database of files. So down here where it says library at the bottom, see library down here? If I click on this button, it's going to open a dialog box and I can choose a folder. So imagine I want to work with a big file of a big folder of something. So here in this mega folder I have like 300 audio files. If I click on that and say open, what it did was it now populated these pull down menus, and I can pull down this menu and choose an audio file from the menu, okay? And all these audio files are obviously from that folder called mega folder or whatever it was. And now I can pick audios from them. So this can be a really good way too to kind of maybe consolidate what you're doing a little better. It depends on what you're doing, but it can be really useful to use those folders by loading the library and then having these in here. But again, you can drag and drop. You don't need to do anything special. You can always drag and drop in here and it works just fine. Okay, so now that we have audio in there, we're basically ready to make sound, right? And let's just return to the basic principles here of granular synthesis. So again, granular synthesis is a form of sound production that involve taking small fragments of audio files and playing them in rapid succession or simultaneously, usually both. These short audio files, called samples, are called grains. So remember that everything in the granulator is at the millisecond level. So it's really important to remember that, it's not in seconds, it's in milliseconds. So if your grain rate is at 100 milliseconds, that means every second there are 10 grains, right? Because 1,000 milliseconds is in 1 second. So these are the three most important concepts to remember about granular synthesis. The first is the grain length, how long each grain is. The second is the grain rate. How fast are these grains playing? Are they playing really quickly or are they playing slowly? And then the last one is the grain transposition, or if you want to think about it, the pitch and the speed of the grain, right? These are the pitch and speed are linked here. So if you turn the pitch down, it will also make the samples longer in kind of the classic transposition way. So there are lots of other buttons in the granular synthesizer, but these three are going to be the most influential on what you do. So let's take a look then at how it works. So you can see down here, these are where the main controls are. I have a button called Start Variation. So if I want to vary the start position of the audio file, this is actually a really good way of creating some minor variation in every single grain. Here is the grain rate, which its lowest point is 20, meaning that there are, I think, 50 samples per second at a grain rate of 20. The length is in milliseconds as well, and its maximum is 1,000, which means that the maximum grain length is 1 second. And then the last button here is the pitch variation. And the pitch variation is going to allow me to turn this up, and what it's going to do is vary the pitch on the above and below the center line of the original pitch. So if I crank this way up, we're going to hear notes really low from the original and really high from the original. If I turn this down like this, we're going to hear pitch variation being a little bit from the center. So it'll vary from on the left and the right side of the center, above and below, just a little bit from the original. So those three are the most important. So let's get this making some sound then. So if I turn, obviously my DSP is on. I'm going to turn the volume up a little bit here. And let me choose a different audio file that has some sound to it. Now, one thing to remember is about the loudness of sounds, right? If I move the slider around here, it's going to choose that individual place for the sound. And if I choose something like this, obviously there's going to be sound here, but if I put the cursor out here, there will be no sound, right? The granulator will make no noise. Similarly, if I randomize this like this, there's going to be a fair amount of grains that are silent because they're playing out here in the area where there's no sound, okay? So it can be important sometimes to trim your audio files into a specific thing that you want to granulate. And the easiest way to do that is in Amadeus, okay? So let me choose one of these again. That might be a more reasonable kind of volume. And I'll just turn this on. So the audio driver's on. I'm going to hit on button and we'll hear what we get. Before I do this, I want to save this just so I can video, audio, put it on the desktop. That way I can sync up the video and audio so you can hear things better. So I'll hit save and then hit record. So this is now recording everything it's doing. I'm going to cover that in a minute. So let's turn it on. So turn this down a little bit. It's clipping. So you can see the volume control for this grain is right here. For the individual granulator, I can move the cursor around just to change the sound up. Let's try something else a little bit. That's a little better. It's still kind of funky. Let me actually grab this audio file that I've been using in class. It's a little less obtrusive and intense. There we go. That's better. Okay? So, of course, what's happening right now is that right now the sound is playing at 20 milliseconds, the rate, and the length is 433. So we have a lot of overlap of individual audio files as they play at this really fast rate. If I turn the rate up, you're going to hear it get slower. So at 317, I can hear the individual pulsing grains, right? And if I shorten their length below 317, it's going to leave space between them, right? Because now there's a break between each grain. So in some ways, it's good to usually have the grain length longer than the rate, but it depends on what you're trying to do. You might want some cool effects. So, and listen to what happens now if I change the start variation. So we're getting a little bit of variation where that sound begins from the beginning. Now let's do some pitch variation. So you can hear it's varying the pitch above and below just a little bit. Watch what happens when I go all the way. Okay, so we get way more pitch variation, way more extreme variation doing that. There's also a distortion here. There's also a degrade button, which is going to lower the quality of the audio. There's a panner, of course. And then there's also other things like reverb and delay, as I mentioned, are really useful for kind of blending your granular synthesizer and making things sound smooth, okay? So anyways, let's turn this rate down a little bit. And we now have kind of a beautiful pad playing, and if I move the cursor, we're getting a really nice mix, right? So remember too, there is now a MIDI keyboard, so I can click through and play a melody with this audio file, right? This individual moment in the audio file. I can also turn the glide up, and this is going to glissando from note to note. Okay, now it's interesting, you're not hearing a very smooth glissando because the rate here is pretty fast, right? So if I turn this rate down, the glissando is going to be smoother. Let's hear it now. Okay. So, and then remember too, it's really important to remember that the audio, the volume of the audio is really based on where I play in this audio file. As you can see, the audio file is fairly dynamic. So right now I'm choosing these moments that are quiet, but if I scoot this over to a loud spot, you can see how much more the volume has peaked, and it's going to be way louder. You can also start to hear the clipping, right? Because we are clipping. If I go down to the main outputs, unmuted, you can see the audio down here is hitting the top of this, which means it's clipping. That's something we want to avoid, so we might want to turn it down a little bit from that spot. Okay, so a couple other things to talk about, and you know, I would just experiment with this. I don't want to tell you too much, just kind of let you work on playing around with it mostly, is that there is something called the dry signal, and the dry signal, of course, is going to give me signal without reverb and delay if I'm trying to kind of point it, make it a little bit more pointed, but also have lots of wash with the reverb and the delay. Anytime you see an R, this stands for randomization, right? And if I want to randomize values, which you know I love, I can just hit this R button, and now it's going to start randomizing these values. I can randomize the panner as well, and I can randomize the delay. And so now we should hear constant variation of this sound. Now remember, the pitch variation is going to make this kind of nuts, but this is what it sounds like. Okay? So anyway, so that just gives you a sense of what those do and how that works. There's also a filter down here. And if I want to turn the filter on, I can just hit, I can turn it to a low-pass filter, for example. I can change the cutoff frequency. I can also add some Q, a little bit of resonant peak at the cutoff if I want. And then let's talk about LFOs. So I can also set an LFO on this, and I can set the rate up here. If I want to have a really fast LFO, a really slow LFO, sorry, I turn the rate way down, turn it up to make it faster, okay? And this is going to affect the entire sound, including the dry signal. So just be aware of that. Now let's turn the pitch variation off. Now you're hearing the filter. Okay? Okay, so let's talk about just a couple other things with this. Let me turn that filter off. And just turning it off sets it back to normal, basically. It can still oscillate even, but there's just nothing, there's no filtering happening. So, a couple other things to notice is that, as I mentioned, this was originally designed for control with a joystick. So you'll see joystick control here. These on and off switches are for that. The LFO, though, does work for both the rate and the length. So let's hear what that sounds like. Now, one thing to remember is, if you notice right now, it's randomizing the rate. If I turn the LFO on, you can see the rate now has these huge jumps in it. It's because the LFO value is competing with the randomizing value. So right now it's trying to LFO, but the rate is also sending randomization values, so it's jumping all over the place. So I would you might get some really cool sounds with that. You might just turn one of them off. So I can set the range of the LFOing with this little slider here. And I can slide this. If I put it in the center, you're going to see it's going to LFO, or it's going to low frequency oscillate from the center to the left and the right very slowly, and basically slowly change the rate of the sound. I can do the same thing with the length. So if we let's do this, put these at the bottom. Let's make the length a little bit longer, turn that off, and hear what this sounds like. So you can hear the rate is going to speed up really fast. Actually, you barely hear it. The reason you don't hear it is because that length is so long, the reverb and delay are kind of softening the really fast overlap. So let's turn that reverb and delay off. Now we should hear the rate speed up. Yeah, we don't hear it either. Let me turn the length way down. Now you hear it, right? You hear that rate slowing down and speeding up. Okay. Anyway, so those are some fun buttons to try out. Let me just explain one last thing here, and then I'll talk about the global settings in general. Remember, so up here, this is the slider for choosing where inside your audio that things play, okay? I can choose the random button, and it's going to randomize. Now, you can see this blue bar here in the center. This is a multi-slider. So watch what happens if I turn the randomizer on and select this. It's going to randomize now just inside that range, okay? If I do this, it's going to choose just inside the range that I selected and randomize those sounds. The rate of randomization is here. So if I want it to be faster or slower, I can change this to make it randomize quicker or slower, or whatever I want to do. So this is another way of kind of randomizing the value. I can also do an oscillator where this moves through the entire audio file very slowly. Now, this doesn't do anything in here. It's going to use the entire audio file. So right now, it's cycling through this audio file very slowly. If I speed this up, you'll see what it does. And I can make this really slow if I want, and I can get this very minute modulation and change of the sound, which is really neat and beautiful. Can be really neat for creating kind of a large washy sound. You know, if I turn the length up again and turn the rate fairly low, 100 is good. Lots of reverb and delay, and we let this play. Cycling through this very slowly. That's how I did the slowdown effect, right? The Justin Bieber effect thing on this track. Okay, so let's talk now about the global settings. Now, obviously, there are two of these, so you can run two of them at once. And it can be really neat to try even the same audio file. Like if I do something like this, randomize this, turn the pan on, I'm going to drop both of these as the same sound, randomize that one. Maybe set these to different rates. One slow, one kind of fast. Let's turn the length up on this one, the rate up higher. In fact, let's turn the LFO on this one. And then start variation, we'll turn that up too, or randomize it, why not? If I randomize the pan on both of these, I'm going to end up with a really cool effect of just the sound mixing together, creating a large pad. Now I'm going to turn down the main volume so it's not too loud. And then this main volume, this main off button here, will turn on and off both of the granulators at once. Oh, let me add some reverb and delay over here. So I might end up now with a really cool sound that I can play around with. Maybe this side has a low pass filter on it that's oscillating at a slow rate. So anyway, we're now generating a new pad with this recording, right? Which is kind of interesting. Okay, so the last thing to mention too, if I turn, I'm going to turn this LFO off. These center knobs right here allow me to actually lock the rate and the length of both sides together. So watch what happens when I turn this rate. You can see the rate on both sides is now locked in, they're in sync. It's because this center knob is controlling both sides. The same with the length. If I do that with the length, it's going to do the same thing. I can also turn an LFO on, right? So if I want the length to oscillate on the same wavelength on each side, I can turn that on like that. I can do the same thing up here. Maybe I'll turn the randomizer on here. And then we end up, with these things in sync at all times, which could be cool, or it could just add some uniformity to the sound that we're looking for or something like that. Okay, so that's it in terms of how this works. Now let's talk about, lastly, how I use it. So I need to bring an audio file into Logic to use it in my project, right? This is not a plugin inside Logic. It's not a track in Logic. It's an external program that you have to record so you can bring that audio file into Logic. So what I do to record things, let me stop this recording. I'll stop that. Is I first, and this is counterintuitive, students are already making this mistake, I have to record first. I just messed it up. I have to save first. So first thing I'm doing is allocating the file location inside the granulator to wherever. The desktop is a great place to temporarily save things. So I hit save, and then I pull this window up. I hit desktop for desktop, and then I can say, recording one. I don't know, whatever. I would save it as an AIF file, or you can save it as a WAV file if you want, and say save. So now it has allocated this recording on the desktop, recording one. You can see it right here. And it's waiting for me to record. So there's nothing in here yet. I have to hit the record button. Now Max is recording everything that it's doing. So if I hit play, it's now recording this sound. Okay? So, and then when I'm finished recording the sound, I have to turn the recorder off. If I do not finish the recording process, this audio file will not finish writing and will not work. Okay, so now if I double click on this, it'll open in Amadeus, and we should see this audio file. There it is. Okay. So now obviously I have a recording of what I just did in Max. I can trim it down if I want. Maybe I don't want all this. And I can save it again, and now I have this recording on the desktop that I can drag into Logic and use in a track. Okay? So Remember, the most important thing to remember is that you must save first. First, I save and allocate the file name. Then I hit record and I record what it's doing, and then I hit record again to stop the recording. And I have to hit stop to finish the recording process for the audio file to work. Okay? All right, so there are a few other buttons on here, but I'm sure you can kind of figure them out. Obviously, the Unison and 8VA things, these change. I think that's the only ones I haven't really talked about. They change the unison, or whether or not the keyboard is playing an octave lower or an octave higher, or where it was, which is in the center. Okay. There's also this envelope controller. If I click on this envelope controller, the keyboard will not sound unless I hold a keyboard note down. So I can actually play like a rhythm with this if I wanted to. But by default, that's turned off, which means the granulator is always playing, right? I think you have to have a MIDI keyboard. Let's test it real quick. I don't remember. Let's turn this on. So if I hit envelope control, you can see that it's now silent. Okay, and sure enough, it doesn't work if I click on this. I have to have a physical MIDI keyboard connected to Macs to make this keyboard work. But then I would hear individual notes when I held down a key on the MIDI keyboard. Okay? The chords button is going to play minor chords based off of the original recording. So it's going to mix the notes together. Okay. And I think that's everything. So, good luck with this. I hope it works for you, and send me an email if you're able to get this going, or if you need help. I'm happy to help anyone make this work.